Hello folks, my name is Jim Worthen. The show is Worthen One. We're here broadcasting from Cox TV Santa Barbara on Channel 17. And you can go to the website for Cox Santa Barbara 17, and you can go to the demand side and you can go down and you can find out and repeat the web broadcasts. And I tell you that because we have the limited audience of the south coast of Santa Barbara and Goleta and Carpinteria, and yet by going to TVSB on demand, you can share it with people in Paris, anywhere. Believe it or not, I've had a guy call me from Paris who watched the show, and I did a show with Bill Pintard, and I do a couple of them each year with the Forester baseball team, and he said some guy called him from Chicago, saw our show on the internet in his hotel room, and wanted his son to come and play for me. Who was just a freshman in college. And he said it just shocked him that there was that kind of reach. And then there's, times when I'm sure no one's watching, and I don't blame no one or anyone. So spread the word, spread the different, YouTube, Worthen One, TVSB, Worthen One, and go channel 17, and you can see us. The only time I'm sure it's playing is Friday at 7 o'clock in the evening, but you can go to the log for channel 17 and find other times that we're playing. My guest today is somebody I've had on twice before during the election campaign, and he really intrigued me because at his tender young age of 17, 18?
18 when the first recording, I believe.
Yeah. Elijah Mack had a mind of that some 40-year-olds philosophically couldn't deal with the same IQ that he has been able to process philosophy and politics and blend them. Am I accurate?
Well, thank you for the kind words, I suppose.
So we had an election.
Mm-hmm.
You were on the ballot, and in an area that was heavily Democrat,
mm-hmm.
and no Republican won at the other offices, Congress and Assembly and President, or no Republican, but you held your mark with them. You didn't, and ahead of some of them.
Yeah.
Tell me how you feel about the election.
Yeah, so overall, I wasn't necessarily expecting to win, just by the nature of this area politically. As you know, I originally was running independent, ran with the Republican Party in a district that was only about 27% Republican. So, it wasn't in the stars from the beginning that I would win this race, but I do consider it a victory in that, I began this race when I was 18 years old. I had no staff working with me. I built my website myself, made my platform myself, made my all my materials, my logo, every aspect of my marketing and messaging was done myself. I brought in my funds myself, and I only was working with about $7,000 total throughout the race. I made my YouTube and social media advertising, my videos. So I was running a fully fledged state Senate campaign that was likely more active than some of the others in the state, possibly, with a very little amount of funding, mostly just me, myself, and I was able to outperform the last Republican to run for this office. So overall, I consider it a great victory, and I'm very happy with how I did.
We were very proud of you. We did recruit you away from an independent candidacy. We said, we don't want to put a Republican up if you're running, but you've got to accept our support. And you did, begrudgingly. Okay. But we didn't give you enough support, and that was part of the problem with our down ticket, is that we raised money, we being the Republican Party, the official party, we raised money and spent it on slates, mailers, where you were on it, but so was Donald Trump. Everybody was on it that was running on that ballot as a Republican. Can you think of anything more that we could have done or should have done?
Well, in terms of the party's official activities, I'm not quite sure about that. But I think the main issue came down to, when it came to getting donors and things of that nature, was a lot of people saw my age and they considered that a negative aspect of my campaign, something that would make me look, immature, as if I have no right to run for this office. My philosophy has always been that my age drives intrigue. It gets people to want to know what this 19-year-old or what this 18-year-old is about, and what drives him to run for office and what his principles are. And so I believe that did happen to some degree. I met a lot of people coming up very close to the race. I was, getting recognized on the street for my YouTube and social media advertising. People were very intrigued with what I was about, and I believe my messaging and the points of my campaign struck a chord with a lot of people across the political spectrum. So whether they voted for me or not, I was, getting out there, and my age is what helped me. Being sort of just your average teenager helped with the approachability. But a lot of people felt, I wasn't a legitimate candidate. I was going to bomb. A lot of people suspected, and so they just didn't find an interest in donating to me. Some people, but I believe this time around, if I do run for another office, I've shown that I'm a grounded candidate in this area, and that I performed alongside the other Republicans just as well, if not more. I believe I slightly beat out Thomas Cole, who was running for Congress. Basically the same district. Mine's slightly bigger than his. We have fewer state senators in California than we do have congressional representatives. So there's about 750,000 people per congressional district, about 1 million people for state senate district.
Yeah, we have 40 senators and 53 congressmen.
Yeah, so I barely edged out some other Republican candidates. I outperformed the last candidate to run against Monique Limon for the same office in 2020. And so overall, again, I'd say I'd consider that a victory. And being an established candidate now, I think, will help me in further races. And so, when it comes to other activities for the party, we're talking about a Republican Party in a deep blue coastal county in California. And there's only so much that can be done in terms of the getting materials out there for candidates and things of that nature, things that cost money. When it comes to marketing and messaging, I'd like to help out the party with that. I think there's some areas where I could be of service in improving that. But really, I have no gripes with the county party.
Well, I owe you an apology, but circumstances dictated that I couldn't fill the position that I'm talented in and should have filled. I was raising money for the county committee and not for any particular candidate. You benefited from the money I raised, but by being part of the slate. But you needed somebody like me in that role who was collecting the checks for your campaign. I think your age would have been a benefit. I think if there had been somebody going around with you, hearing you speak to a crowd and a group and seeing the reaction, I wouldn't have been surprised if they could have raised $100,000 for your campaign. Seriously, there's a maximum. There's some people who would love you so much they'd want to give you $10,000. Well, they can't. There's a limit on the contributions. You never got the limit, did you?
No.
And candidly, I think other Republican candidates like Cole and Sari, I don't think they had a great number of people to reach the limit. The last person who did pretty well with reaching the limit was Andy Caldwell. And unfortunately, his campaign went in a direction that became, you couldn't beat Salud by, God bless him. You know, I know of 17 churches that he was invited to give a sermon, not on Sunday, but other days, and crowds, and there's votes there, but there's votes on the sidewalk, and you have to be willing to get down and talk to people and ask them what they need.
Yeah, and I mean, running in a district like mine, or in the coinciding or overlapping congressional districts, I mean, it's a lot of people you have to reach out to just to win, period. Even if it was, an area where things were closer in terms of Republicans and Democrats, to bridge that gap between the two, just to get your name out there to those people, it requires a lot of energy and a lot of money and a lot of exposure. Like I said, I brought in about $7,000 in this race. Almost the entirety of it went into YouTube and social media advertising. I got about 200,000 full views on my main videos, and my videos were viewed for under 45 seconds almost 1 million times in the district. But when there's 1 million people in the district, and a lot of those are the same devices viewing it over and over, it's really a drop in the bucket. You put in $7,000 into that, and for all I know, the people who could watch my videos or seen my advertisements or seen my interviews on the news or read my interviews on any print media or digital news media, for all I know, they could have just forgotten about it the next day. So it requires, being a down ballot candidate where people aren't really paying attention to state legislative races, and you're in an area where you're with a party that's only about 1/3 of the population, it really just takes a lot of money to get out there. And so regardless, even if things were worked out, that I had, a whole team reaching their webs out into all the different circles where I could get, income from that, it probably wouldn't have worked out. It's just the nature of this area. And so part of my...
When you say the nature of the area, that's not the environment, that's the 23% Democrat registration edge above the Republicans. That's the nature of the area.
Yeah, and I mean, that's not to speak any negatively of any of the people who are registered Democrat. That's just one of the main, as I was about to say, one of the main philosophies of my campaign, as you know, is trying to get individuals to feel more comfortable voting based on policy, not on party.
Right.
And so a lot of people, in the state of California, they feel like we have issues with our state politics. They feel like virtually every politician out there is bought and sold by private interests, or looking to force some ideologue vision on everyone. But they're still not necessarily electing change, because they still feel like voting for the endorsed Democrat is voting for the lesser of two evils or whatnot. And so it helps any political environment, whether you're in a deep blue state or a deep red state, for individuals to research each candidate and vote based on their policies, based on their character rather than their party. And as we get people to do that in the area, then eventually it'll become more possible for races like mine to actually go through. But for the time being, it's an uphill battle of creating that sort of more cooperative political environment.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, I've seen some studies that show in the down ballot, down to judges even, people go into the polls and they don't know who any of the candidates are. So they say, well, he's a Democrat, I'm a Democrat, I'll vote for him. And same thing with Republicans. It's self-label, and the philosophy is important, but it isn't as determinative as we think. So what are you going to run for in 2 years?
Well, I like to keep my cards close a little bit, but potentially running for state assembly might be on the agenda. And the state assembly district will basically be covering Santa Barbara County. So it's kind of like a county-wide position in terms of how the race will go. So considering doing that in 2026, but until then I have a few different ideas going on. I might actually head out to DC for a while. to potentially work for an elected congressperson, things of that nature that I have going on. Lots of opportunities after this race, but I'd certainly like to, run a few more times in electoral politics, because I definitely would love to serve in a legislative position and be able to debate and discuss policies in front of the state before. Yeah.
So you have an opportunity now, as particularly young men, even more than young women, to go to Washington right now. And you mentioned working for a congressman, working in the 5,000 people that Donald Trump has to appoint. He isn't going to meet most of them even, but he has an appointment secretary and staff that will vet them, and you'll pass vetting. And so it wouldn't hurt to spend a year and be able to come back to an assembly district with the credential that you were, such and such a position in the congressman's office, or the, and you can always, those positions are enhanced by telling. I was assistant to Congressman Jones. Well, he has 5 assistants, but people don't. You were the assistant.
And it would be definitely a good experience in terms of, I don't have a law degree, and I don't have I'm not an individual working in finance or anything like that, so I couldn't necessarily hold a position where it's working on legal issues for congressional representatives, being a formal legislative assistant, or things of that nature. But one of the things I certainly like to help with, whether it's working with a given political party or working with a candidate, would be marketing and messaging. Another thing I might do is I might wind up with working in some capacity with the California State GOP, working on marketing and messaging. That's an area where I feel like I might be of some use to the party. So things of that nature, I'd like to try to, with this race under my belt, I'd like to try to take the skills I've developed or that I've learned that I can help the party with, and try to work that route as well.
Well, but you're a libertarian. We were talking earlier, and I told you of the history of the Libertarian Party in the 80s and 90s. Kind of was growing, went downhill, and I said, "Do you know why?" And you said, "No." And I said, "Because they all became Republicans and have tremendous philosophical input into the Republican Party." So your optimum, what's next, which was the title of our show, would be to spend a year away and come back in time for the March filing for the next election.
Yeah, something of that nature. I definitely want to. I feel like this so to speak, wasn't the real race or the real experiment I was planning to run originally. This was sort of getting the ball rolling so that I could actually give, a real, get in there and give a real race, so to speak. This was, I was getting in here with no party I was working with. Like I was saying, it was just sort of me, myself, and I with the marketing and messaging and making the website and all of that. So this was sort of getting my foot in the door into electoral politics, and now I can run the race that I sort of wanted to in the beginning, so to speak, if that makes sense. Now I have the experience, now I know what I'm doing, now I can really go into this, swinging, guns a-blazing, and really put out a good race and see how it goes, whether I win or not. It'll be a good experience, and I'll be getting my messages out to people, and hopefully, like I said, helping craft an environment where people can feel more comfortable voting based on policy, not on party, and trying to help heal some of the political divide we have in this state.
Well, 8 years from now, you'll be an old man of 27, 26. And you'll still be the young whippersnapper, as we say. The interesting thing to me is how thoughtful and how clear you've made your philosophical argument on a variety of issues that Republicans sometimes stay away from. I'll take the worst one to start out with, and then come back to the easier ones. What's your position on the environment and global warming?
Yeah, so I consider myself a classical environmentalist, so to speak, which I've discussed on here before. My sort of environmentalism goes back to the early American environmentalists like John Muir, Henry David Thoreau. I think of environmentalism as sort of, with a focus on protecting and preserving the natural world and promoting humanity's sort of cooperation with it, is something that is crucial to our culture, is crucial to our health, is crucial to our well-being as a society. And it's my sort of brand of environmentalism is less like the contemporary left-wing environmentalism that we have, where they take environmental issues and use them as justification for economic restructuring, for more socialist-esque policies, things of that nature. I mean, you see it in the American Green Party. They're openly democratic socialists, things of that nature. So for a lot of the contemporary environmentalists, environmentalism isn't the main issue. It's using environmental concerns, environmental issues for a political end. But I personally, my philosophy is more that we can have a truly free market society that is cooperative with environmental principles, and a libertarian society that harmonizes with the environment, so to speak. What I mean by that is, within libertarianism, and I should probably explain that first, but within libertarianism, within free market philosophy and things of that nature, there's this notion that, every individual has a freedom to live their lives as they see fit, as long as they don't infringe on the rights of others to do the same, as long as they don't violate the person or property of other people. First of all, blatant environmental issues, whether it be pollution or things of that nature, affect other people and their property. So by taking from a purely libertarian standpoint, or a purely conservative standpoint, or a purely free market oriented standpoint, we can put forth legislation regulating certain activities if by affecting the environment they are directly affecting other people or their property. One of the main issues, though, I used to love to talk about in my campaign is as the Republicans, we can put forth solutions to environmental issues that I think are much better than what the Democrats are advocating for. I've been a big advocate for regenerative agriculture, for nuclear energy, things of that nature. It's what I find especially interesting about regenerative agriculture, and we can talk about more on that later, so if you'd like. But by simply freeing the agriculture markets, by getting the agrochemical industry out of that whole field, by getting the government and private sectors out of bed, we can propagate these agricultural practices that are great for carbon entrapment, great for improving soil health, great for improving biodiversity. And some statistics that we're seeing indicate that if the U.S. agriculture, about 30% of it went regenerative, or 40% of it went regenerative, the natural carbon entrapment from that process would bring us to net zero. So that big golden calf for a lot of the left-wing environmentalists of reaching net zero, we could do that just by freeing the agriculture markets and alternating our agricultural practices to be more, to speak to that regenerative agriculture philosophy, more harmonious with the broader environment. And so that's just a little bit of my environmental, what I've been trying to bring to the GOP is in terms of how we can speak to different environmental issues. Nuclear energy is another big one. Nuclear energy is a clean, efficient, cheap form of energy. And here in this state, we're seeing a lot of taxpayer dollars be dumped into fruitless renewable projects in solar and wind. And I think we need to see about potentially making investments in nuclear in the state of California. Just not only based on the environmental aspects, but in the long term, this is a very inexpensive and very inefficient form of producing energy.
It seems to me in listening to you that a lot of the problems that you are talking about correcting are caused by government regulations and big corporations that are free to do what they want in competition.
Yeah, using the government to get around competition, using the government to allow themselves to violate the personal property of individuals. So oftentimes, it's what it comes down to is it's not, a lot of these issues don't come down to it's the free market's fault or the fault of private individuals or private corporations. A lot of it comes down to these private entities working with the state to, and this has ramifications in all sorts of fields, especially in healthcare, in terms of the cost of healthcare. When you have these corporations in bed with the state, and because of that, they're experiencing, exploitative IP laws that give them monopolies in various fields. They have legal protections from the ramifications of their actions. The government's giving them benefits through regulatory capture and things of that nature. Basically, all this to say, these are entities that, by working with the state, they're able to avoid competition, they're able to avoid the consequences of their actions, so they are left with being these monopoly powers that can get away with violating the personal property of other people, damaging the environment, without having to deal with the ramifications of it. And so we really need to look into how the state, because oftentimes in environmental discussions, the state is always assumed to be the good guy in the situation. The state's always assumed to be the solution to all the issues, but we never look into why these. Oftentimes, not never, but oftentimes, especially among left-wing environmentalists, no one's ever looking into, why are these private entities able to get away with what they're doing? Why are they in the position they're in? And this also applies, like I was saying, to healthcare, and people talk about the cost of healthcare. The solution's always assumed to be in yet another state regulation or yet another state subsidy that can be used ultimately, again, to be bent back around and serve the interests of the private sector.
It reminds me, and I'm not sure where I heard it first, from Assemblyman Brooks Firestone or from Governor Ronald Reagan, the most terrifying words in the world to people in enterprise, whether it's their own family and farm or businesses. I'm from the government and I'm here to help you. That's those terrifying words that you can hear. Mm-hmm. And so do you concur with that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
You're just too young to have made it up. We talk about the environment. Well, if you were sitting down with Elon, mm-hmm. would you explain to him that he's a full-blown libertarian?
Elon's an interesting character. I'd say that he certainly has some libertarian tendencies overall. What I'd love to see from him in his position that he now has to speak to political issues in the U.S., I'd like to see him really get behind nuclear energy and things of that nature. I can see a lot of more conservative figures being able to talk about that, especially when they can now use it as an argument, not only as an objective argument for, this is a good policy, this helps the environment, this helps the taxpayer, right. But they can also use it as a tool against the left. A lot of these conservative commentators, they're not going to necessarily talk about a subject unless they can use it to really hammer on the left. And so we can talk about nuclear in that fashion. We can talk about promoting regenerative agriculture. The issue just comes down to, when you look at a lot of our congressional representatives, Republican or Democrat, a lot of those types of individuals aren't able to speak to this issue because it affects, who's lining their pockets in the agrochemical industry, big ag, all of that, or funding from solar, wind, oil, preventing these individuals from talking about nuclear or regenerative agriculture. But a lot of, especially with the more populist movements within the contemporary right, I could see a lot of people such as Elon be able to talk about nuclear power, regenerative agriculture in a way they're using it to sort of dunk on the left. But I would love to definitely see individuals like that speaking to those issues.
I've quoted him before, but my son once said that nuclear is really the answer, mm-hmm. and people don't realize that there's at least 2, if not 5,000 nuclear plants all over the country. Mm-hmm. And I said, what? He says, well, every military establishment, every ocean-going American ship, and they're everywhere, mm-hmm. and they don't have to be gigantic, and mm-hmm. they don't have to, he even suggested you might get down to where your trucks and cars were powered by small nuclear fission.
I mean, especially with a lot of the innovations in nuclear energy, with both fusion and fission reactors and all that sort of technology that's coming up, we could definitely see a lot of localized, safe, small-scale production of energy through nuclear. A lot of people, as you said, a lot of people talk about the ideas of just cars that are self-powered running on nuclear, or having a small reactor in your home, or powering your neighborhood, or things of that nature. And I really like that idea for various reasons. It really decentralizes the infrastructure. It makes things more competitive. You could have different providers, obviously, licensed to make sure, go through all that hubbub, but you could have different competing private providers working on localized, decentralized, small-scale nuclear energy for people. It makes the whole thing far more efficient. Makes the whole thing, as in makes energy production and infrastructure far more efficient in the long term if we can start transferring over to that. Although it's a little bit of a futurist technology, so to speak. We don't necessarily have everything in line for that.
I don't know how much thought you've given it, but I'm going to throw you a curve that we've never talked about. Microsoft has just gone to 3 Mile Island and is talking about firing up that nuclear plant because AI requires so much energy. We have no concept, those of us sitting, turning on our light bulb, of the amount of energy. I guess it's because AI is all the thought processes in the internet forever that anybody's had, all shoved into this thing called AI. How does a libertarian conservative look at AI and, for instance, what Microsoft is doing, where the energy is so required that can be done without government and big corporations?
Yeah, certainly the amount. It also requires a lot of water, especially in the areas in the centers where they're using water cooling for these facilities. It is a big weight on the infrastructure. The basic sort of knee-jerk libertarian reaction would be to say, well, leave it to the private entities to figure out how they're going to supply all that. But of course, unless they have access to their own wells, and of course, unless they're having their own localized nuclear energy or something of that nature, it's going to be coming from the state-funded and provided infrastructure. That really comes down to what's the cost on the taxpayer, how much is it going to cost to really, as these things scale, what's it going to really require if we're going to have all these entities, sort of taking the water and electricity from the existing infrastructure. I don't know much about the Microsoft situation, but if they're talking about, furnishing their own source of energy through nuclear, that's one thing, and I believe that's certainly a viable solution for that. AI more broadly, talking about it from a libertarian point of view, that's a whole subject as to how individuals are using AI and things of that nature. Personally, I do not know how AI will go in terms of its influence on our infrastructure and things of that nature. In terms of operating, for example, I used to work at Target. And we have, when I worked there, it wasn't, AI technology, even just like 3 years ago, wasn't as advanced as it is now. But we had a lot of automation in our, seeing what we have coming in on the trucks every day, seeing what we have in our back rooms, seeing what needs to be out onto the floor, seeing how many people have purchased a certain item. And a lot of people are saying, well, you take this information that exists in our current databases and software and programs that we have, feed it into AI, and eventually, if we have AI driving the cars, if we have AI working the factories, if we have AI going on the floor stocking things, we can just automate the whole process. But even from what I experienced then, there's really, you need a human touch somewhere in all of that. And to, thinking of it in a libertarian way, I've seen some people getting concerned that, they're going to try to use AI to centrally plan economies, for example. Get around the calculation issue. It's these things are so smart, and you could just feed in all this data to it, and it'll be able to know exactly, what's needed from, talking about the calculation problem, as in when you look at centrally planned systems like in the Soviet Union or things of that nature. They don't
Yeah.
know. They don't know what's being produced, how much is actually needed. Things just, it's hard when you're not having a bunch of individual private actors competing, interacting, trading. So they're thinking, oh yeah, they're going to try to use an AI to replicate that to get around the calculation problem, which I don't, I don't necessarily think it's gotten to the point where it can manage anything like that.
But there could be a fear that the reason that the Soviet 5-year plans always failed was they didn't have enough information.
Yeah.
So could be a fear that government, business will do 5-year plans and have enough information to tell you where you're going to be in 5 years, whether you like it or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, what it comes down to is, theoretically, on paper, you could say it works out for to have a central authority to be able to plan entire economies and infrastructures and who does what and manage the division of labor and all of that. But in practice, I don't know how possible it is, and obviously I wouldn't advocate for it because that sort of system is fundamentally abhorrent in the eyes of anyone who's looking to have a life of individual autonomy and is interested in free enterprise and free markets and things of that nature. It's just but I don't necessarily think, at least for the time being, there's technology capable of
We have small business, small agriculture,
mm-hmm.
and they don't seem to be growing like the big businesses and corporations. What's restricting their growth? I think I know the answer, but why isn't the guy who starts a pizza chain in Santa Barbara and he has 2 pizza parlors, what's keeping him from having 200 in California?
Well, I mean, around everything, there's a great deal of red tape and there's a great deal of taxation that very much disincentivizes individuals from, growing their businesses beyond a certain scale. And part of it in certain fields, in certain fields of the economy, the big businesses providing a certain good are going to be, like we were talking about earlier, in bed with the government. They're going to be at a certain level of protection and state-sanctioned monopolization that it's going to be hard to break into that arena to get up to that level. And so individuals, sort of, the businesses are either going to be very small or they're going to be very large conglomerates, these big monolithic entities. And it's hard to traverse that gap because one has the hand of the government guiding it, and one of it's just the free enterprise that's not, or the private individuals who aren't really allowed to compete with those big guys due to the regulatory capture, subsidy, legal protections, things of that nature. And so, but even when you don't have that, it's just always hard to scale up as a business when you have such a great deal of statewide and federal taxation on individuals and businesses. When you have local regulations of all natures, it can come all the way down to just local zoning or local regulations on. It just depends on what type of business we're talking about. Of course, it's a complex issue. But really, it tends to be the government, at fault when individuals just aren't able. When you have a good business that's just simply not able to scale up and afford to scale up in any capacity.
Well, the government, believe it or not, is made up of people.
Mm-hmm.
And we're beginning to realize as the benefit from COVID economically was we realized that people who said they're home working or they were doing 4 days of work and taking off 3, they weren't.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't working. They produced information, but they weren't closing the deal. They weren't making sure that the businesses could be successful.
Mm-hmm.
They've recently done a new study that's old of how much time the tax code is taking out of production. How much time the average citizen takes to produce their W-2 and their W-4 filings.
Yeah.
That in most cases, it surpasses when you apply a reasonable payment to it.
Mm-hmm.
It surpasses their tax.
Mm-hmm.
They're spending more money to do the tax than the tax is. How do you feel about simplifying taxation?
Absolutely, yeah.
What
Simplifying the process and minimizing the taxation burden itself. I mean, I'm no expert on taxes, and you can see me on filing day, going through all those processes. But I mean, the best way to simplify taxes, in my mind, is to minimize the number of taxes.
Cut the just spending.
even if you don't want to cut the spending and you don't want to cut how much you're taxing people, don't have just a bajillion minor taxes attached to various different things and processes. Just make it, try to make a flat tax whenever applicable. Things of that nature. And I mean, to have a more specific answer or more specific proposition, I'd have to have the tax code out in front of me. I was told by I forget who said it, but I mean, when you look at the national tax codes, the sheer amount of the text is something like, what was it, like 8 times the length of the Bible in terms of the letters. Like, it's just this thing that we're not going to be able to crack into unless we have some people in Congress, a solid majority, who are willing to do the dirty work of breaking into that whole thing and replacing it with a far more streamlined system.
Well, all taxation really can be very regressive, even though we have layers that make it seem like the wealthy are the productive are paying more. They have ways to avoid in those layers. But the two taxations that most libertarians or conservatives are for, the flat tax, and the other is a user tax, sales tax. Can you tell me how you've thought about those two, if you have?
Yeah, so a flat tax, or even a flat tax, it scales for income a little bit as well. I mean, that wouldn't be a flat tax, but simplifying the, overall, I'd say I'm an advocate for just applying a major flat tax for just the majority of the income we need for the state government, for the federal government. Just make it simple. Here's your income. Here's your saved income, your taxable income. This is the percent that's going off. Just make it clear and simple. Sales tax, I think, even if we're talking about the same amount of money being taxed at the end of the day from a person, sales tax, just by the nature of being tagged onto the exchange, disincentivizes people from buying and selling. It's just, it's a sort of psychoeconomic phenomenon where individuals are going to be buying and selling less when they pull out if let's say all our federal taxation was just thrown onto a big fat sales tax, when they pull out their receipt and see, okay, this costs $10, then there's a $5 sales tax.
That's about what it would be, about a 40% tax.
So it'd be a greater disincentive, and it would certainly not stimulate the economy very much if individuals psychologically went through seeing that much being taken off even if we're talking about the same amount of money. So overall, a flat tax would be preferable. I know one of the interesting things Donald Trump sort of played around with, now his actual quotes aren't super clear on the issue, but the idea of replacing the national income tax with tariffs. I don't think he genuinely, because I've heard some things from Trump that are very much more leaning towards free trade, or idealizing free trade as a principle. I think his pushing for tariffs is mostly a strategic thing for foreign policy. The threat of tariffs will get other nations cooperating with our economic agendas and what we want, and that he wouldn't actually ever apply those tariffs, because he knows that fundamentally, you ask any free market capitalist or any economist in the classical liberal tradition, a tariff is a tax that ultimately gets placed on the consumer. But that was one thing he was talking about that I think it was one thing that gained a lot of intrigue for him and perhaps even helped his campaign, just from the idea of talking about, playing around with the idea of abolishing the income tax just sounds good to a lot of people, But That was another theory I've heard, but again, like I said, I don't really expect him to be super duper tariff heavy. Perhaps, that might just be my speculation, because I think his strategy with threatening tariffs is mostly a issue of foreign policy. Just the threat alone. Because he can be a little bit wily. So even if the people in foreign nations know what the general plan is, they know, oh yeah, he's just saying this because the threat of a tariff might influence us. They don't know for sure. He can be a bit of a character, which would help that process a little bit more. So I don't think he's legitimately going to push for replacing the tax burden of Americans to any super significant degree with tariffs. I think that's mostly a tool for influencing foreign nations.
Well, people don't realize that this nation ran several wars and Western expansion without an income tax. It was all done on use taxes and what we would call tariffs today, but what's the right term for them? Anyway.
Yeah, and things, of course, were quite different then. The cost for operating the federal government for state governments was much, much lower. And that system certainly worked out for quite some time. Although I think with the sheer amount of bloat our current federal and state government has, if we're going to run everything on tariffs, we'd essentially have to prepare for some degree of becoming a little bit more isolationist, providing everything in-house, because no one's going to put up with that stipend. Just like how I was saying, replacing a federal income tax with a federal sales tax, hypothetically would greatly disincentivize people from even, just buying and selling. A similar thing would occur for, international trade and things of that nature if we just, put everything on tariffs. It was something that, functioned pretty well back when our government was far, far smaller and far less expensive to run.
The theory on sales tax against income tax is you have the freedom of whether or not you spend the money to get a sales tax.
But you're going to have to spend it eventually. You can't just sit on it forever.
Well, no, there's mattresses with gold bullion under. No, I think the answer, and we're going to find out in the next 4 years, is the having less people doing government. Not necessarily the programs, but less employees by the government. And there's a thought right now with between Elon and Vasquez that there are going to be these people who have been working from home, only coming into the office one day a week, are going to quit. And there used to be a saying, don't let the door hit you in the ass on the way out. Instead of the typical government advocate saying, we're going to have to hire new people and train all those people, and it's very expensive. No, let them go. They weren't doing much anyway, we found out. Something you and I haven't discussed, but is going to be more and more important, and that is our military preparedness and military reach. What do you see as the libertarian, pro individual freedom proper role for our military?
Yeah, so certain people who identify as libertarian have a very, I'd say, a kind of unrealistic view of foreign policy and unrealistic view of the need for national defense. As a libertarian, it's not about just abolishing everything we get our hands on. It's about, bringing as much as possible as much power as possible to the individual, to the free market, to voluntary associations, mutual aid, things of that nature, and minimizing government to the most we can while maintaining, social stability and things of that nature. And I'd say advocating for a sort of a peace through strength approach, regardless of how expensive it is sort of the necessity within our current, foreign policy environment for maintaining a safe nation. I prefer I imagine the proper term for my overall view on foreign policy is, this is a bit of a contentious term with a lot of different connotations, and it means different things in different time periods and different people, but the term is national liberalism. Overall, my approach is I'm skeptical of intervention in foreign policy, in foreign wars and things of that nature. While I believe it's necessary at some times to get involved strategically with certain things or funding certain other entities to maintain our economic dominance in the global economic order as a free nation, and I'm certainly critical of. To some degree, I'm critical of both a lot of globalist foreign policy ideas as well as isolationist ones. I have sort of a middle-of-the-road approach on foreign policy, but what I'd like to see is we have a strong, well-funded military that has a presence around the world. Not to say that we're going to be out there world policing, but I think we need to regain a certain strength.
Why have
and image.
a presence around the world?
Well, I mean, a strategical presence around the world. We're not just going to be sitting at home, not having any, there has to be cooperation with nations around the globe, especially those who are, overall I believe in the foreign policy, the liberal foreign policy ideal, not liberal in the progressive sense, but in the traditional sense. I mean, some would even say that Bush was in this field, but the approach of working with these other nations, cooperating with them, aiding their militaries, being present with those who have the same vision for a economically free world, and we have to be cooperating with them to some degree. I'm not talking about intervention or fighting other people's wars or proxy wars, but just maintaining a.
How long are we going to occupy other countries? People don't realize we have an occupation force in Germany that's 60 to 80,000. We have an occupation force in Japan that's 60 to 80,000. We have an occupation force in South Korea that's 30,000. How long are we going to keep doing this empire that should have ended on the last day of the Second World War?
Well, I would have to
argue with me.
Well, I'd say I'd have to. I'm not an expert on why specific quantities of individuals are stationed where and what the necessity of that is, and what the risks are of pulling certain people out of certain places. On principle, I'm okay with the notion of having, to some degree, a presence around the globe, and especially within other nations that are on our side of the geopolitical fence and advocating for, democratic republicanism, advocating for economic liberalism, i.e. capitalism or free markets. But, I'd have to pass that question on to someone who has a far more intimate knowledge of the reasons that we have certain people stationed where, the quantities, and what the risks are of pulling people out of different locations.
Well, one of the stated reasons that we have really some measure of a military in 120 countries, even if it's down to 50 people working around an embassy to train other, is that we're spreading democracy. Are we sure that the way our government has gone over its life, that we have the only way to rule in the world? Is there other, parliamentary kingdom,
Yeah, well, I mean, when people say spreading democracy, usually they don't just mean spreading, the democratic electoral process. What they really mean is spreading economic liberalism or capitalism or free markets or whatever you want to call it. I don't think anyone in the U.S. government is saying, gosh, Liechtenstein is a principality. We need to have a military. We have to have a military presence there because if a country is has free citizenry, they have free markets, they're economically cooperating. We should do what we can to maintain that there's this economic order in the world that is, the American experiment. It comes back to how we as a country are the sort of shining light of how these other countries can operate their economics and have free markets and personal liberty and things of that nature. And it's good to try to help and sustain other countries that, regardless of whether they're kingdoms, principalities, they're parliamentary governments, that's not the main issue. The main issue is, promoting economic liberalism, personal liberty, and things of that nature. And of course, I think in the past the U.S. has gotten far too ballsy in their foreign policy and has stuck itself where it shouldn't be, and has been, creating a negative image of the West and creating a negative image of American presence. And I think we've certainly been our goals in spreading democracy, quote unquote, have been counterintuitive at times.
You mean we aren't ugly Americans?
Well, I mean, so what I'm saying is not. I'm talking more about a peace through strength approach. I don't want us to have to be out there, creating foreign wars, policing situations that have nothing to do with us. But we do have to have a careful and tactful approach in making sure that we appear strong, making sure our allies appear strong, so that we don't have to enter into these situations in the first place. One of Trump's strengths when he was in office was his ability to really, not only negotiate and be a bit of a diplomat with these other foreign leaders and make them think that he's their friend. A lot of people thought he was being far too friendly with Putin or Kim Jong-un in a negative sense. I think that's just him being a businessman. They think he's on their side. They think he's their friend. They think they perform. They develop that sort of environment. But I think we should have an approach as a country where our sheer strength and the strength of the countries who are working with us in this vision, prevents threats even coming in the first place, and allowing that economic influence of economic liberalism and things like that to, on its own, through necessity and through influence, bring personal and economic liberty to the world. You look at a lot of countries in the Middle East where we haven't been militarily active. A lot of them are embracing more American principles and American ways of life and economic principles just because of the surrounding influence and because of the economic necessity of engaging with countries like the United States. So we don't necessarily have to be world policing. We don't have to be intervening in foreign conflicts and things of that nature. But we do have to, in my mind, maintain a strong military and a strong presence and a strong image as not only America but the West in general. And that sort of ties back to what I was saying about some libertarians. Some libertarians think we should just totally and completely just not regard anything going on outside of our country in terms of foreign policy, in terms of military. We just have a very small, and I'd say probably small to a fault, military that simply just will only get involved with anything if there's a direct attack on America. It seems like we're running out of time, but you know what I mean. I try to have a middle of
got about a minute.
Yeah, it's all good.
Till after the Second World War, we didn't have a large standing military. Now, some people think the fact that we went from 300, 400,000 troops overseas in the First World War to 20,000 standing army is the reason the Second World War came. It may not have been. There's other ways to look at why it came. We're out of time. Do you think we could do it again?
Oh yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.